Awesome. Thank you so much. Good morning to everyone. My name is Colin and I'm presenting this paper on behalf of the UX Pedagogy and Practice Lab at Purdue University and for the excellent work of my co-author, Shruthi Chivukula. And you'll be hearing from her in the third slot here today. So in this talk, I'm going to present a practice-led in situ account of the UX designers' practices from an ethics perspective, increasing knowledge about how practitioners engage in everyday ethics as an important component of their work. Through a set of 3 diverse cases, I'm going to describe the everyday work practices of UX designers shaped by multiple mediating factors that constrain, shape, or direct the ethical impact of design decisions. HCI scholars have become increasingly interested in describing the complex nature of UX practice, focusing on the subjective yet professional knowledge that designers rely upon to support their practice. In parallel with this increased interest in studying design practice on its own terms, HCI and STS scholars have sought to describe the ethical and value-laden relationship between designers and design outcomes, and the role of design knowledge in informing ethically centered practice. However, despite decades of interest by design and technology scholars regarding the importance of engaging in ethical practice, little research describes the ethical engagement of design practitioners on the ground and on its own terms. Over the past decade, there's been an increasing awareness of the importance of ethics in design and technology education in fields of science, engineering, technology, and in academia. However, as you're likely aware if you ever read the news headlines, this awareness has not generally led to the increased ability on the part of practitioners to work or act in an ethically aware manner, despite the existence of numerous existing methods, frameworks, and codes. In this paper, we're building upon the work of Shilton, Steen, Verbeek, Van Weinsberg, and other STS scholars to situate our research, furthering a rich account of how ethics and values are addressed or could be addressed in professional design practice. In particular, we intend to more fully describe the rich context in which ethical concerns emerge and reflexively shape design processes. Practice-led research efforts in HCI have revealed aspects of the remarkable complexity that defines design practice. But the pragmatic and situational roles of ethics is still often underdeterminized and under-theorized in the design and HCI literature. Many existing efforts to describe ethical practices in a range of research and design contexts rely upon common framings of ethics from philosophy, including perspectives such as consequentialist, duty, virtue, and care ethics. We choose not to explicitly use any of these perspectives a priori in grounding this study, and instead seek to identify and describe ethical considerations that are described by practitioners on their own terms. The contributions of this paper are twofold. First, we document cases that describe the emergence or suppression of ethical decision-making in UX practice, detailing the interactions and positionality of the designer within each case. This provides new knowledge about how ethical awareness and decision-making emerge without guiding methods or frameworks on the ground and the practitioner's role in this work. Second, we describe ethical decision-making through the lens of mediation, building upon existing work from activity theory to identify how organizational, personal, and ethical frameworks impact, shape, or extend design practices. And this provides further guidance in exploring the role of pragmatist ethics in describing and managing design complexity. To achieve these goals, we used a multiple case study approach, with each participant organization pair serving as a case unit, and we viewed each case study holistically in the write-up. The primary goal of case study research is not generalizable, and so although the rich detail obtained through each case can be expected to lead to insights or hypotheses that may guide future research. The data for building the case studies was collected through 3 primary phases. First, we conducted interviews or observations with 3 expert UX practitioners in a range of work contexts in the United States. 2 researchers documented their experience with handwritten field notes, which were later combined into a detailed, thick record. These observations were completed across 2 or 3 sessions, totaling 7 to 10 contact hours per case, with the goal of documenting design complexity in each of these organizational contexts on its own terms. All research activities were approved by our institutional IRB, and all direct and indirect participants in the observations were consented. Each participant is referred to by a pseudonym, and the elements of the work context are anonymized to protect the participants and their organization. Second, after the final observation session, either 2 or 3, we conducted 60 to 90-minute follow-up interview with the direct participants at the center of each case study. This interview was intended to clarify researcher notes from the observations, form as an initial set of member checking, and broadly document the perceptions of the participants regarding the role of ethics and values in their design work. These debrief interviews focused on stimulated recall of projects and primary decisions, including follow-up questions relating to the rationale for their decisions, prior experience that might have guided those decisions, and other relevant actors or environmental cues that appeared to be salient in the observation. Finally, we used a multiple case study analysis approach to enable us to build deep insights about the complex phenomena we observed and analyzed in each observational context. We used a bottom-up coding approach to identify salient factors in relation to ethical awareness and decision-making. The thick records and interview transcripts of each participant were analyzed to form conceptually similar chunks. We began with creating chunks of the main activity-related themes, and 3 main themes emerged through a bottom-up thematic analysis that helped us to describe the richness within and across cases in relation to ethical awareness and decision-making. We found that these were really shaped around 3 areas. One was the individual practices of participants related to or unrelated to their work environments. Second, the organizational practices or policies which were evident throughout the team. And third, the individual and specific examples that guided us to understand in an applied way their ethical awareness and practices. We identified multiple participants through a snowball sample, beginning from our personal and professional networks. Participants in the 3 cases range in experience from 6 to 11 years, and currently work in a range of industry types across the United States, spanning enterprise, in-house agency, and remote agency work. These participants brought different sets of work and educational experience, and each played a different role in their team, ranging from consultant to manager to partner. Across these 3 cases, we completed 7 to 10 hours of observations across 2 to 3 sessions, and 60 to 90-minute follow-up interviews across all 3 of the participants. Now, all 3 of the cases presented different levels of individual and organizational complexity that mediated how the designers dealt with the ethical complexities of their design practice. And I'm only going to talk explicitly about one of these, but I want to give you a sense of what all 3 of the cases look like as a whole. John largely externalized ethical responsibilities that didn't neatly fit into his role, using the resources provided by clients as a boundary through which he could bifurcate his responsibility to the client versus his potential ethical role. James took on a leadership and mentoring role, taking responsibility for ethical behaviors in his team, including close attention to the ethical character of the design outcomes his team produced. And Martha was restricted by her organizational practices and the roles of other product lifecycle manager professionals within her organization, and focused on design practices that largely focused on usability and efficiency rather than the broader potential for ethical impact. These varied observations and cases give us a variety of modes of ethical complexity that may arise in design practice. Due to time constraints, I'm going to focus this presentation just on one of the 3 case studies, but the write-up for all 3, of course, are in the full paper. To support this case, we completed 10 hours of observations in 3 different sessions with James's team of designers and concluded with a 90-minute follow-up interview. James works for an agency that creates solutions to client projects, specifically focusing on website applications. He's worked in the field of UX design for about 11 years, and he has had more than 3 years at his current organization. Currently, he leads a design team of more than 6 UX designers with a range of skill sets in user research, interaction design, and graphic design. James has an educational background in UX design with a master's degree in HCI. Through our analysis of our observations and his interviews, we understood that he believes in, quote, regularly refreshing his knowledge to inform practice. And he takes responsibility in building others' ethical character, and he strikes a balance in ethically nuanced situations by knowing the limits of taking advantage through your designs. I'm going to discuss each one of these 3 themes in detail in the next few slides. First, James believes in regularly refreshing his knowledge to inform his practice. Through his actions and through the interviews, he revealed that he believes that updating his store of knowledge outside of design practice and the design world writ large strengthens and helps him better evaluate his ethical behavior. He reads books based in the science of design and, more broadly, coming from biology, psychology, and other fields to more fully understand human behavior and how his design work might fit within it. His regular refreshing of knowledge gives him contextual information about the application of values from other products, continuously building his repertoire of examples that might guide or shape his design practice. This refreshing of knowledge also helps him to engage in self-reflection on client projects and discussions, and this helps him to form and articulate ethical judgments for critique or for developing design concepts. And these judgments frequently emerged in our observation session and in his reflection afterwards. Second, James takes responsibility in building others' ethical character on his team. James corrected and critiqued the design thinking of his team of, quote, young designers to evaluate their own judgments. And this was mirrored in multiple conversations that we came across in brainstorming sessions, where he communicated to designers his goal for agency practices to not use, quote, fear-based persuasion, and to not choose to not be involved in client projects where these kinds of dark UX practices were a primary goal of the shareholders. James valued not only the technical qualities of his designers, but also the development of an ethical perspective that is personal, yet in resonance with the agency's goals. He encourages his designers to focus on user research and its importance in developing design. His practice is in contrast to what we'll see later in John's case, where he worked within the boundaries of business goals and what was contracted, even if there were unethical practices observed in other parts of the organization or shareholder system. As the design lead in his agency, James also expressed his responsibility to develop practices at an organizational level to improve applied ethics on his project teams. The team follows an activity called landscaping, or a deconstructing approach to brands in their stand-up meetings every Wednesday, which we got to observe. This critical approach is highly individual, drawing on each designer's unique perspective, with the acknowledgement that, quote, analyzing the trends keeps our judgments and taste high. This critique and reflection encouraged each designer to keep up to date on visual and interactive trends, allowing them to take inspiration from these materials and develop their own aesthetic sense that was, quote, timeless, trendy, but not fashionable, thus bringing longer shareholder value rather than requiring a brand that would require updates on a yearly basis. Finally, James struck a balance in his decision-making by knowing the limits of taking advantage through his designs. Across the three observations, we followed interactions, which I'll present as a brief dialogue between the stakeholder and the design team. In one of the meetings, the CEO of a company that James's agency was working for stated his goal as such, quote, we want to push people to specific actions we know they will like and want to use while they're in the demo. And then after they're familiar with and excited about the potential of this functionality, we introduce the functionality as a premium, end quote. The stakeholder's goal here was to, quote, try to get more people into the project, this was a specific project management tool, using growth hacking techniques by intercepting their attention. To accomplish this business strategy, the stakeholder was explicit in mentioning how they wanted to constrain the user's choice, what we know from our previous work is a dark pattern, by showing the advantages of their tool and making the user pay later. In James's response, both in this initial meeting and in later interactions with his team, he felt that, quote, we, as in his team and the company, could do better, designing an experience that had value without taking away from somebody. In particular, James described the creation of freemium functionality that was more balanced towards user needs without, quote, costing an arm and a leg to someone. This balance of user and shareholder needs involved an ethical judgment on the part of James and the agency, where the goal may be to increase your net revenue, but that it must be done for the right reasons. Across all three of the cases, we found similar themes that exemplified the influence of situational factors on designers' design decisions, designers taking on different roles in their workplace in different forms. And looking at all of these occurrences, we found that the designer was always at the center of the ethical mediation that was taking place among these three factors. Our analysis, present in each case and elaborated in the discussion of the paper, presented a common mediator-driven position of the designer at the core of the ethical complexities that were taking place between three things: individual practices, organizational practices, and applied ethics. I'll briefly show you how some of these mediated interactions took place using James' experience as an example. James was simultaneously constrained and enabled by organizational and individual practices, allowing his personal values to impact the construction of the agency environment, and for those organizational practices to then constrain the ethical actions of his employees. This stands in contrast to John and Martha's experiences, where their organizational practices only constrained their action and their awareness of ethical concern. James's regular effort to learn from other disciplines and infuse these lessons into his design practices strengthened and broadened his ethical foundations, allowing him to articulate clear beliefs about issues such as technology addiction. In contrast, John's experience seemed to promote a disconnect or disjuncture between his ethical framing and his individual practices. He allowed his business strategist role and designer role to work independently, using his work practices to inscribe the distinction between these roles. Across these set of ethical mediation interactions, we have sought to describe what we term ethical design complexity. And this builds on Stolterman's notion of design complexity from his 2008 paper. By ethical design complexity, we refer to the complex and choreographed arrangements of ethical considerations that are continuously mediated by the designer through the lens of their organization, individual practices, and ethical frameworks. So just a bit of future work. As we look back towards our participants' work context, we see the need to further investigate how we might inculcate an ethical design character in design education and design practice. Through these stories, we see numerous opportunities to develop additional methods to support designers' ethical awareness and ability to act. While existing frameworks such as value-sensitive design provide a helpful starting point, there's space for engaging more directly with a designer's ethical character and the forces that constrain or enable ethically centered action. We also identify opportunities for strengthening leadership roles for designers within organizations. allowing for designers to more fully impact the organizational structures that might currently constrain ethical action, potentially leading to applied ethics that resonate with themes of social responsibility, equity, and inclusion. I'd like to acknowledge the efforts of a number of researchers on the UXP2 lab team for their efforts in data collection and analysis, including Ria Minocha, who's here in the audience, Jason Breyer, Abby Perez, and Chris Watkins. We also want to acknowledge the support of the National Science Foundation, and I'm now open for questions. Thank you.
I just want to highlight the fact that we've got microphones. So please, if you have any questions, if you can move to the closer to the microphones, and if you'd kindly state your name and affiliation so Colin can get back to you. So, any questions? Any questions?
Right? Okay, yeah. Dag Svan, Center in Trondheim, Norway. Did you encounter any situations where there were actual conflicts?
So, a bit. So the instance with James, where I really provided the central case, was an example where there was this conflict between what the shareholder wanted, and this came up in the context of project meetings. So that's probably the closest we saw to conflict. In the other two environments, the ethical concern was so low, or the awareness of ethical concern was so low, that it never came to a point of tension. And I think this is where we really characterize the difference between what we found and what is currently supported by other methods like VSD, where VSD requires that awareness to already be there. And in these cases, in a lot of these organizational contexts, that awareness wasn't even able to happen because of the constraining forces on the designer.
Thank you.
Yeah, Michael Veal from the Alan Turing Institute. I was wondering, a lot of the issues that are coming up in many areas of computer science around ethics are actually quite difficult to analyze. They take a lot of manpower and effort and time. How did you find that time could be basically acquired by somebody in this context? Because there's some things that maybe surface quite easily, like you're talking about dark patterns and broad business models, and some things that require deeper analysis.
It's a good question, one which I do not have a fulfilling answer for yet. The third paper in this session will present a quite labor-intensive method to do some of this ethical evaluation work. We're hoping in our next steps, based on the work that we've discovered here, to identify more methods to align with some of the specific mediating tensions that we've identified, but I don't have anything more productive to share at the moment. Thank you.
I do have a question myself. Did you ever ask the participants to actually define what ethics are?
We did not. And so in the follow-up interview at the end, we did engage them in a quite a lengthy discussion about ethics, about dark patterns, which is the larger framing of some of our work. And we did sort of get a sense from them about what they felt ethics and values were, but we never explicitly asked them for a definition. We had enough interactions with them, though, that we were able to triangulate pretty well what ethical paradigm or paradigms they might be arguing from. And that's certainly something that we present a little bit of in the paper. Thank you.
Let's thank Colin again.